Welcome to the YouTube channel Ukraine Today. Vladimir Rabchun is here with you in the studio. Subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. It's easy for you and it makes us happy. YouTube's algorithms really like it and it helps promote our content. And now straight to our topics. It seems that Lavrov has become Russia's main newsmaker. Putin's loyal horse has spun a lot of tales in recent days. About the so-called illegitimacy of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and about Nazis in the uniforms of the armed forces of Ukraine. But for some reason, when asked, when will Putin stop being afraid to meet with Zelensky? Lavrov didn't answer. At the same time, US Vice President JD Vance stated that Russia's war against Ukraine could end within the next 6 months. 6 months. All the details are in our report.
The Kremlin continues to masterfully distract attention. Lavrov declared that Moscow rejects the US conditions for establishing peace in Ukraine, but at the same time blames Zelensky himself for everything. Supposedly, he is rejecting all the proposals.
Trump raised all these issues at a meeting in Washington where Zelensky and his European sponsors were present. He made it clear that there are several principles that, in Washington's view, must be accepted, including renouncing NATO membership and discussing territorial issues. And Zelensky said no to all of that. He even refused to repeal the law banning the Russian language. How can we meet with someone who only pretends to be a leader?
Of course, Lavrov couldn't help but mention a meeting with Putin, even though Zelensky has repeatedly expressed his willingness. But it was the Kremlin that spoke of some kind of serious and lengthy preparation with no set timeline. But now he's once again blaming the president of Ukraine.
He says his immediate priority is a meeting with Putin, but that's simply a mere game, a strategic and intricate game, a game he is exceptionally good at playing, primarily because he consistently desires and actively seeks out drama in absolutely everything he does. He genuinely does not care at all about the actual substance or true essence of anything.
Well, they certainly have to blame someone, don't they? Just not themselves, of course.
In fact, after Washington, after that particular and significant incident that happened, the Russians basically and completely disappeared from the information space for a full 3 days. This was a notable and unusual absence, especially given the circumstances surrounding the event. They can't afford to offend Trump. So consequently, they are compelled to shift the entire burden of responsibility onto someone else, a different party or entity, because of course, it was always abundantly clear that Vladimir Putin was never going to meet with Volodymyr Zelensky, has not been inclined to, is not currently going to, and unequivocally does not plan to engage in any such direct diplomatic encounter whatsoever.
As stated by the European Commissioner for Security and Space, Andrius Kubilius, Moscow is simply afraid that Ukraine will actually receive real security guarantees because that would complicate the planning of new aggression.
This is an absolutely correct statement of fact, which is strongly supported by compelling evidence. Russia does not want any truly effective security guarantees for Ukraine because it is set, let's say, not just on destroying the Ukrainian state, right? Because it cannot achieve this goal by military means. It is set, as before, on destroying Ukrainian statehood.
Meanwhile, Vance suggested a possible end date for the war. He said it could end within the next 6 months. He also expressed optimism regarding Trump's policies.
We are trying to negotiate with both the Russians and the Ukrainians to find a compromise and stop the killing. I think the president has tried to pursue a very active, very energetic diplomacy here.
The 6 months that Vance specifically mentioned, of course, they are absolutely not based on any precise calculations or detailed analyses by American think tanks whatsoever. It's just a rather figurative, let's say, a conceptual and virtual positioning without any concrete basis. It won't work, and we shouldn't expect that such a complex, deep, and profound conflict between Russia and Ukraine can be resolved in 2 days or 2 weeks.
And regarding the accusations from the Hungarian Foreign Ministry about threats to their state from President Volodymyr Zelensky, Andriy Sibiha commented,
I'll answer in the Hungarian style. There's no need to tell the president of Ukraine what to do or say, or when to do it. He is the president of Ukraine, not of Hungary. Hungary's energy security is in your own hands. Diversify and become independent from Russia, just like the rest of Europe.
On August 25th, Germany's finance minister Lars Klingbeil arrived in Ukraine on an unexpected visit and upon arrival stated that Ukraine can continue to rely on Germany's unwavering support.
Perhaps not publicly, but it is highly probable that Germany will now be considering specific industrial and technological clusters much more concretely and with greater focus, let's say specifically concentrating on establishing a robust and integrated joint military-industrial complex with Ukraine. In actual fact, in some significant ways, this particular situation is even more profoundly interesting, precisely because it represents a much more concrete and tangible signal than, for example, the recent visit of Merz.
Meanwhile, the German foreign minister stated that concessions from Ukraine are only possible when it receives real security guarantees. Essentially, guarantees equivalent to NATO membership. Without this, demanding the return of territories is simply impossible. Well, at least it's good that someone in Europe understands this. Joining our broadcast now is Dmitry Revus, an expert from the United Ukraine Center. Dmitry, glad to have you with us.
Hello.
Please tell me, is this just a feeling we're getting? Or is it really the case that the issue of a direct meeting between President Zelensky and the dictator Putin is gradually fading away?
Well, it's not just a feeling, it's a trend. Putin was running around at the beginning of the year, or rather at the start of summer, end of spring, when Donald Trump was proposing this meeting. By the way, even then, it was very painful for Moscow because afterwards they started explaining why they supposedly never intended to go anywhere in the first place. And actually, that's also an interesting point. Back then, Putin ended up almost exactly in the kind of situation he likes to create for others. The way he talks about himself as if he's this streetwise thug from the back alleys, and that's the kind of psychology he's used to employing. In fact, yes, it basically turned out that he was challenged and couldn't refuse. And he couldn't handle that challenge, so he didn't go, and in fact, later he even tried to justify himself. Now, when we can already state that everything turned out differently than what was promised, than what was said about it, well, for example, it's hardly even remembered now, but Donald Trump said that there would be a meeting on August 22nd, right? So, yes, that is precisely why absolutely everything is currently coming to absolutely nothing. The government in Moscow truly continues to steadfastly stick to this deceptive policy of imitating its supposed goodwill and its alleged profound desire to establish a lasting peace and a genuine comprehensive negotiation process. Why is this the case? Because if they were to deny this too openly and too obviously, we have already clearly seen how even when everything was meticulously done in this cunning, manipulative way, as they themselves perceive it, the former President Donald Trump still very quickly started issuing incredibly firm ultimatums. Naturally, they are trying in every possible way to avoid this. But in actual fact, the crucial meeting between President Zelensky and President Putin remains just as utterly unattainable and is becoming even more profoundly distant precisely because of Putin's inherent cowardice and the undeniable fact that he is deliberately avoiding it. No matter what they say or how they desperately try to explain it away, like Sergei Lavrov is currently making up right now with his fabricated narratives and baseless justifications.
Yeah, we'll get back to that. But how did it happen that essentially the statements made by various representatives of the White House suggested that literally on Friday, yes, there would be a meeting. So a meeting between Zelensky, Trump, and European leaders in Washington at the beginning of the week. And then they immediately say, yes, literally on Friday, there will be a direct meeting between Putin and Zelensky. That's it. Everything, as they say, is all set. That is, both sides gave their consent. The main thing is that they managed to get the appropriate response from Putin. And then, well, suddenly there's a flood of statements about why this won't happen. How come? How did this happen? How did it turn out this way? What went wrong? At what stage or at what level?
Well, if this were the first time, because let's remember the war was supposed to end in 24 hours, if you listen to Donald Trump. Yes, I mean, he kept saying this throughout the election campaign, that he would need just 24 hours to end the war. And then they also explained why and how that didn't happen afterwards, because there is a lack of understanding in Washington about Putin's real motivations and about Russia in general. Donald Trump genuinely and truly believes that Vladimir Putin is deeply interested in making significant and mutually beneficial deals, in fostering robust economic relations, in gaining substantial and tangible benefits, and not at all in his actual underlying and real motivation, which is this profound and historical restoration of Russian greatness and territorial conquest. So based on this, of course, there will always be misperceptions, as if some kind of agreement has been reached. There's a desire for such evasive answers. But in reality, Moscow is transparent, like a bottle of Russian vodka, in all its cunning. So for us, for Ukrainians, there are no secrets. Exactly the same, by the way, as for the European coalition that supports Ukraine, that Moscow is deceiving. After the first, well, not the first, but after Witkoff's visit to the Russian Federation in August, when the first information appeared that Moscow supposedly had some desire to establish peace, President of Ukraine, Zelensky, said that it's good if they do, but the main thing is that they don't start deceiving, don't deceive as they always do. That's it. But yes, of course, if you want to be deceived and don't understand the real motivation, then of course you'll have these illusions that yes, Moscow is ready for negotiations. Yes, they'll agree now. Yes, they'll hold them now.
Does this mean that the attitude in the White House has also changed now, let's say, toward the US President's Special Representative Steve Witkoff? After all, Witkoff was the first to bring the news that basically all that was left was for Trump to meet with Putin. And that meeting took place in Alaska, and they're definitely going to come to some kind of agreement. Why? Well, because it's guaranteed, because Putin has already agreed to everything. There are concrete agreements. All that's left is to sign them. It turned out that things are not just different, they're not like that at all.
I think it's unlikely that this change was drastic, since there is still a desire to continue negotiating with Putin. And here we have this contact person who is constantly communicating. By the way, Witkoff, he also, well, in fact, he was subtly introducing, so to speak, a kind of deliberate, calculated cunning. Yes, that is, he also said it was at his suggestion that the idea was voiced that Moscow was supposedly ready if it occupied the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Yes, that is, the parts under Ukrainian control, supposedly ready to give up full control completely over the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. Which, by the way, looked like nonsense from the very beginning, for the simple reason that, well, we understand perfectly well what Moscow's like. And if they claim that they've supposedly written it into their so-called constitution, then they never intended to give any of it up, right? So nevertheless, this deliberate deception was there. I don't think there has been any change in this regard. I think he will remain the same kind of negotiator for quite a long time. Although the fact that the State Department has a different and more realistic view, yes, that's obvious.
Has this also affected Ukraine's European partners? Or have they long understood who they're dealing with in the person of Putin, for example, or other representatives of the Kremlin? Why am I bringing this up? It's just that right now we don't hear a direct statement, for example, from the Russian dictator saying, "No, I refuse to meet with Zelensky." Instead, we hear plenty of reasons from Lavrov as to why this meeting supposedly can't take place.
Yes, there are both direct and indirect explanations for why this is the case. You know, here's another point, by the way, something the Europeans definitely understand. There is a coalition supporting Ukraine, the coalition that was in Washington, but that's not the full picture. Why? Because, well, there was also, for example, a statement from the northern and Baltic countries, 8 countries, in fact, who are also more than clear in their support. So we see that even if not all of Europe understands this, the leading part, a significant part of it, does understand. As for such truly and unequivocally outright outcasts as the controversial Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, well, there's really absolutely nothing more to discuss or even consider, since in actual fact his significant and long-standing problems with the broader European Union and its core principles began a considerable period of time long before Russia's full-scale and brutal war against the sovereign nation of Ukraine ever truly started, right? And they had absolutely nothing to do with Ukraine, yes, but rather with the principles of democracy, good governance, and the pervasive issue of corruption. That's it. So yes, there is this understanding, yes, this support exists, and I genuinely believe that this particular aspect truly does, in a significant and impactful manner, contribute to and profoundly influence the established political stance and overall position of Donald Trump. And there's another point. In Europe, they fully and completely understand that Russia is indeed a criminal entity, and that it must be dealt with accordingly and appropriately. International law and humanitarian law are more than clear. And that's why, naturally, if you reduce everything to negotiations and try to force these countries to simply talk to each other instead of discussing the punishment of the aggressor, then yes, you'll regularly fall into this mistake of thinking you can quickly reach an agreement and bring everyone to the negotiating table. But that's not how it works. And in Europe, of course, this understanding exists.
Today, during a joint press conference with the Vice Chancellor of Germany, President Zelensky made a statement which is quite clear and logical, that Russia's supposed willingness not to seize new territories cannot be considered a concession and in no way constitutes a concession. Against this backdrop, it's interesting that different statements are coming from the United States of America. In particular, Vance, the Vice President of the United States, said that in general, Russia, or rather Putin, is ready for major concessions. And then there was a statement from Kellogg, another special representative of the President of the United States, but this time for Ukraine, who said that the process of providing, or in general, the very process of security guarantees for Ukraine is quite energy intensive and not a simple process. Is it possible to combine all of this in the mind of the President of the United States?
Well, I think it's possible, but it could take a very long time for all of this to happen. It's clear that, well, practice has already shown that the illusions that supposedly Putin is ready for some kind of negotiation process should have disappeared, but they haven't. Regarding this supposed possibility that Putin is allegedly ready for some kind of compromises and major concessions, see, even Ritkov talked about this, who also said that it was actually at his suggestion that these theses started circulating, that Russia is supposedly ready to even write into its constitution that it will not attack Europe, that it will not continue to seize more of Ukraine. In fact, Ukraine's position on this matter is absolutely logical. The Russian Federation has violated specific agreements with Ukraine. This includes the major treaty from 1997 and the border agreement from 2003. And it has rewritten its constitution many times, yes, well, made numerous amendments. So what kind of agreements from Russia could there even be in the form of guarantees? And in Europe, by the way, they understand this too, because it's about Europe's security, yes. So all these promises that there will be no further aggression. That's precisely why I firmly believe that it's entirely possible to achieve a certain profound understanding of this complex situation, but only when Donald Trump genuinely and truly believes that it's his very own original idea, that it was authentically born and conceived within his own mind. Well, if that's what's needed for the cause, then why not? Let it be that way.
And in your opinion, how do all these processes that we are witnessing now affect the upcoming midterm elections in the United States of America? Let me remind you, they are scheduled, if I'm not mistaken, for the fall of 2026.
26th. I think that they do have an impact because, well, we've already seen that after the meeting in Alaska, Donald Trump, when he got such bad press in the United States, was forced to respond accordingly. Yes, that is, well, what do I mean by accordingly? That is, it seemed to him that this was very bad, but nevertheless there were harsh statements, and yet this in some way adjusted his position. So yes, this definitely has an impact, and it certainly affects the pre-election situation.
Okay. What do you think voters expect from the President of the United States regarding the Ukrainian issue or regarding Russia's war against Ukraine? And to what extent have these expectations already not been met at this stage?
Well, if we look at the sociological data, sociology regarding the United States and in general attitudes toward Putin, toward Ukraine, and toward Russian aggression against Ukraine, then despite everything in the United States, the attitude toward Putin is generally negative. Support for Ukraine remains quite high, and the attitude toward Russia is also very critical. And so naturally, one would expect, well, let's not speak for all of American society, but in this context, it would probably be more logical to see tougher actions, including the implementation of sanctions and support for Ukraine. Therefore, and probably in combination with this Alaskan meeting, this also had some influence, and that's why Donald Trump is somewhat irritated as well. I genuinely believe that a significant change in this particular policy would undoubtedly have a very positive and beneficial effect on Donald Trump's own personal approval ratings. But here I think that, well, I think it's just a matter of time after all.
Well, yes, I'm sure there are enough people around him who can point this out to him. At the very least, I don't know, political strategists. Thank you very much. Dmitry Livas, an expert from the United Ukraine Center, joined our broadcast. Thank you.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.